Hello, welcome to Pause for Faith. It's very good to be with you. Just let me check everything is coming through. Great, we're live. Nice to be with you. You can see my funny title. It's a quote. It's a famous phrase, often different versions of this phrase, but here's my phrase. The perfect is the enemy of the good. The perfect, or the best, is the enemy of the good. This has been used in so many different contexts. You might have heard it before. I've certainly spoken about it many times, indirectly, but I've never actually unpacked it. And the reason I'm doing this is because I've said this before. I'm reading through at the moment, rereading Francis de Sales, a wonderful book by Francis de Sales. It's got lots of his quotations in, and I came across this phrase in his writings. Now, when you look up the phrase, you find all sorts of origins, but I've never heard it referred directly to Francis de Sales, so this was a nice discovery for me. Let me sum up what it means and then go into a bit more detail and unpack it and hopefully say something helpful for you. And then I want to finish by going to those original quotations of Sir Francis de Sales, applying them to the spiritual life and really showing you how wise and helpful, as in so many things, Francis de Sales is. The perfect is the enemy of the good. What does this mean? It means that sometimes our desire for perfection, for getting everything 100%, can stop us doing something that is good, solid, and worthwhile, and a bit more ordinary. That an obsession, a worry about perfection, getting everything right, can undermine the ordinary good things we want to do or the good things that we are doing. The perfect is the enemy of the good. If you look up this online, on Wikipedia, whatever, it says the origin of the phrase, commonly understood, goes back to Voltaire in 1770, when he quotes an Italian proverb. So obviously it's existed for years and maybe centuries, but Voltaire quotes a proverb, Il meglio è l'inimico del bene. The good, the best, rather, the best, the perfect, is the enemy of the good. So it's a very tidy, easy phrase. That's from 1770. As I say, that's why I was so happy to read in Francis de Sales, the Treatise of the Love of God. When's this? It's from the early 1600s. The early 1600s, where he says, people busy themselves trying to discover what is better, and they miss the opportunity of doing much that is good. They're trying to discover what is better. They miss the opportunity of doing much that is good. So there is the wonderful Francis de Sales, century and a half before Voltaire. And this is biblical. I'm sure it's in lots of places in the Bible, but the passage that comes to mind is the parable Jesus tells of the tower. So this is in Luke chapter 14. Jesus says, which of you, desiring to build a tower, does not first sit down and count the cost, whether he has enough to complete it? Otherwise, when he has laid a foundation and is not able to finish, all who see it begin to mock him, saying, this man began to build and was not able to finish. So Jesus giving a visual, practical example of someone who was trying to build something that was just too big. And it meant that nothing was built at all in the end. If only he'd started to build a simpler, more humble, more practical tower with his resources and his money, he might have finished it. But the perfect, the desire for perfection, for this dream tower, stopped him building a tower that was actually useful and real and finished and built. You don't need to be religious, of course. This is not a religious teaching, first of all, though I want to apply it to the spiritual life later on. In science, this is a kind of aphorism, a truism. And it's also a law. I don't know what the name of the law is. You can tell me if you know more than I do. But just the law of diminishing returns, that's the common way of putting it, that when you're trying to design something or build something and you are getting closer to the perfect product, the perfect material, whatever scientific project you're working on, that as you get nearer to perfection, you need more and more effort to keep increasing the efficiency or the closeness to perfection. So you've put all this time building this product, this material, this project, to get it to 70, 80, 85%. And you maybe did the first 50% fairly easily and fairly cheaply and quickly. But to get from 85 to 90% and 90 to 95, you've got to put far more energy and get much less return for each additional 1%, the law of diminishing returns, that your further activity is increasing your inefficiency. And from science to dating, how many dating books speak about the 80% rule? It's great to have a wish list, who you hope to meet, who you'd love to marry, your hopes and your dreams. But if you're always looking for 100% in your potential partner, everyone you meet, you're never going to be satisfied, and you're never even going to start, because no one you meet is going to live up to this dream that you have on your wish list, or this fantasy that you last saw in this romantic movie. But if you have a list of hopes and dreams, yes, just a little bit of dating advice here quickly for you if you're single, and yes, you should have some non-negotiables, some red lines. I do not want to be with someone or marry someone with this going on in their life, or this reality. Okay, but I've got my wish list, my hopes and my dreams. I've got my red lines, my non-negotiables, and then with all the other things, the wish list, to use the 80% rule. Let me look for someone who is a wonderful person, who brings loads to our friendship, to our relationship. It's not 100%, but it's 80%, and that's amazing. And it's not to be careless, indifferent, it's not settling for second best, but just to say, in any relationship, there will be a 20%. And at least let me be open to this person. Let me see if this is the person I'm looking for, or if I can live with the 20% that doesn't match up to my dreams, or if we can work on the 20% and iron it out as we go along. So it means it's not just dating, it's anything in life. It's buying a new car, it's moving house, it's finding a new job, having a set of dreams and goals, some non-negotiables, but not to be looking with these perfectionist eyes and dismissing things which might be bringing us so much, if only we could be a bit more open to the 80% instead of focusing on the 20%. A lovely quote from Robert Watson Watt. Robert Watson Watt, who developed an early warning radar system in Britain to counter the enemy planes. And he propounded a philosophy, what he called a cult of the imperfect, a cult of imperfection. And he said this: in any big project, in this example, in the radar system, give them the third best to go with, because the second best comes too late and the best never comes. I like that. Apply it to ourselves. Give me the third best. Let me do the third best, because the second best comes too late. Maybe I can get to that place next week or next month, but the moment for it might have passed, and the best itself, the perfect, is never going to come. not in this world, not with my life, my reality. Okay, just an introduction. I'll come on to Francis de Sales. Let's just reflect on how this wonderful truth and the painful, sometimes destructive desire for perfection can affect us at different levels in different areas of life. I'll put this under the heading of planning, action, and 4 headings: planning, acting, psychological well-being, and spiritual well-being. Right. How do we apply this truth to planning? Well, sometimes, even before we've begun to act, just in the planning and the thinking, instead of starting, we get trapped in the planning and the thinking. And we're so caught up in trying to get our plans right, our preparations, that we never actually act. We can become paralyzed. We want to get everything ready. There's maybe a fear of failure, a desire for perfection is muddled up with a fear of failure. We can waste too much time thinking. You know, if you're English anyway, I'd love to know what the other phrases are in other languages. The English phrase, a bird in the hand is better than 2 in the bush. A bird in the hand is better than 2 in the bush. I can dream about catching these birds, but it's better to have 1 here within in my grasp than 2 just out of my grasp. So, okay, for a few people, the risk is that they would be impetuous, rash, do things too quickly. But I'd say that for the majority, that's not the risk. It's the opposite risk. It's a fear of acting. It is a perfectionism. So for most of us, I think, maybe it's 70-30 or 80-20, for most of us, what we need is to get into a better habit of having a preference for action. A preference for action. A default to press go, even if we're not 100% sure. We'll make some mistakes. It's a bit risky, but most of us are not messing up our lives by doing too many risky things. Some are, most aren't. Most of us are thwarting our lives because we're not taking enough risks and stepping into a world of action. And to assure ourselves that in many, if not most situations, it's better to start, to see how it goes. I don't mean get married to someone or be ordained if you're not sure, but it's better to develop a friendship and see if it leads somewhere, to start to date someone, to get engaged, rather than never doing anything. It's better to pray about your vocation, to talk about it, maybe to go and speak to the vocations director. Maybe even, as I said to myself, I'll go to seminary for 1 year. I'm not sure if it's right for me, but I'll give it 1 year, and I think it's better to try and to start. In business, in management theory, in innovation theory, they speak a lot about iterative cycles, continual improvement processes, meaning instead of trying to get this perfect project plan and then launch it on day 1 and sell it to 1 million people, it's better to see how something goes, to test it with a few people, to pilot it, to have a soft launch, and then to see if it takes off, what the feedback is, and then to keep improving it and to see if it keeps being appreciated. Or if it crashes, okay, you haven't wasted too much time and money. Or if it takes off, in which case you need to learn, and this is the tough bit, how to scale it, how to develop it. But you're piloting, you're doing your A/B testing. Does A or B work more? And you've got some real results instead of just theorizing. Continual improvement. It's better to act than just to think or plan. So that's how this truth can affect our planning and thinking and preparation. Secondly, how can it affect our actual action? So life. Here are you and I, we're living, we're getting on with so many different things in an average day: work, family, relationships, shopping, eating, exercise, prayer, leisure, life. And how can we apply this phrase? Well, even in the things that we're already doing, the things that are underway, we can sometimes get lost in the detail, in seeking perfection. So instead of getting on with something and doing it as best we can and being grateful for it and making the most of what we have in a very matter-of-fact, pragmatic way, sometimes we just kind of grind to a halt. We become paralyzed, we become frustrated, we stop being able to see the good that's being done, to appreciate, to value. That's what the word appreciate means. We stop being able to properly value the worth of what's happening and to keep it in perspective and to see the good. And all we're doing is feeling a failure because of what hasn't been achieved. And this can undermine the work that we're doing, and it can even make us stop doing something when we've got no reason to stop. We need a realism. I've quoted that phrase, maybe the third best is what's needed, because the second best comes too late and the first best never comes. But to change our mindset and say, actually, no, this isn't second best. This is the best that I can do now. I need a realism. Life is about living in the real world. It's what we can do in these circumstances now, not in my dreams or my fantasies. Connect this with the question of risk management. Very relevant in COVID, isn't it? This is in the news all the time. We live in quite a risk-averse culture, I think. For not just to do with COVID now. I'm not making a point about COVID or politics, but just for decades now, there's been so much pressure to avoid risk, to insure against risk, so much fear of litigation, and quite rightly, so much good improvements in health and safety and legislation and so many areas of life where we've learned not to be careless and reckless and to try and face what needs to be faced and to create a healthier, more responsible, accountable culture. Great. But it can make us risk averse, where we imagine falsely that the aim of a culture, of a family, whatever, politics, is to completely get rid of risks. Whereas it's not usually. It is to manage risk well, as best we can, to mitigate risks. Here am I, a senior chaplain, managing a team, a building, a budget, and I have to do a risk management template for the diocese about the areas of church life, the chaplaincy life that I manage, a risk register. And it's not about removing risk, it's about managing it. And if you've seen a risk register, it's about identifying areas that are green, very safe, amber, a little bit risky, and red, very dangerous. And it's about moving the red into the amber and the amber into the green as much as possible. But it's managing it, not trying to pretend that we can get everything into the green zone. Because if we do that, it means that we're creating other risks, unintentional consequences, because to completely get rid of risk, you've got to shut down lots of life. And you've got to create new risks because you're not doing many good things that need to be done. So again, you can see how difficult this is for politicians and healthcare people thinking about managing COVID risks. I'm not taking sides. I'm saying how complicated it is. To counter this, again, one or two people, is it 5, is it 10%, I don't know, are crazy and reckless and heedless and are taking far too many risks. But many of us We're afraid of taking risks, and if only we took a few more. And so for many of us, we need to try and rethink it and be a bit braver. And again, there are red lines. There's not stupid things we should do. I'm not saying to be reckless, but in many areas of life, to take a bit more risk, to be a bit braver, to be a little bit less risk averse, while being very careful about mitigating the serious risks we need to. I'm remembering a business book I read. I think it was Tom Peters' In Search of Excellence, a kind of classic book, telling the story of a company that he visited. Excuse me. I need a drink. A company he visited where the boss had a big bell in the lobby of the company. And when he heard that one of his employees, one of the projects had failed, so they've put time and money into a project, they've given someone a responsibility. When the boss heard that a project had failed, he went out into the lobby and rang this bell, this physical bronze bell, loud and crystal clear, to echo round the whole company to celebrate a failure. He wanted failures to be acknowledged and celebrated because he realized he wanted to build a culture where people took risks and learnt from failure and were not going to play safe and stay in the safe zone with the safe projects, and were not afraid that they would be judged by their peers or their bosses if they took honest risks and made honest failures. To encourage celebrating honest failures. Okay, this is action, the area of action. How do we apply this to psychology, to our psychological well-being, our mind and our heart? Well, look, if we're constantly trying to seek perfection and afraid of failure and always noticing what we haven't done, it can lead to so many insecurities, and it can reflect, in fact, a lot of insecurities. How sad it is for all of us, me included sometimes, we've all felt this, how sad it is to be always worrying about what we've not done, to be judging ourselves against a measure of perfection that's not real, it's ideal, always trying to live up to something. The student who gets A's but is never satisfied because they haven't got the A star or the 87% that their best friend has got. The child who comes home with a good report, but the parent is always critical, saying, why didn't you do better, and never satisfied. We can internalize the nagging, unhappy parent, the inner voice, so that we're never happy with ourselves because someone, look, all parents make mistakes. There's no perfect family. Someone was not happy with what we achieved or what we didn't achieve. This is the famous Alanis Morissette song from her first album, I think. What was it? Jagged Little Pill? I got the title right of the album. Alanis Morissette, the song Perfect, and the line is, she's imagining this young woman, this singer-songwriter, she's imagining the parent speaking to her. Sometimes, I won't sing it, it'll get embarrassing. Sometimes is never quite enough. If you're flawless, then you'll win my love. Don't forget to win first place. Don't forget to keep that smile on your face. Be a good boy. Try a little harder. You've got to measure up and make me prouder. This overbearing parental voice that's in our minds so often. But it's internalized. We're trying to live up to this inner voice often. It stops us seeing the good. The good. So just for a minute, leave the perfect away. The good, the ordinary, the wonderful things that we've done. The solid day-to-day stuff. The things I've managed to achieve. to be grateful for the blessings that God has given me, put it in terms of faith. Forget religion for a minute, just to be grateful for who I am and what I've managed to do, however small. Gratitude. The simple pleasure of a job done well, not perfectly, but well. The importance of having some checklists so I can tick off, wow, I've done 7 things today, maybe not 13, but 7. We're always seeing what we haven't done. We switch off our computer, we go to bed at night, instead of thinking of the 93 things I've done today, moderately successfully. I'm thinking of the 3 I haven't done, and they're bugging me like flies flying round. The pressures on parents today with the lockdown and the pandemic, how often am I hearing this? Every parent feeling that they're a failure. The importance of remembering that phrase, good enough parenting, or let's change it for COVID, just about managing parenting, or not having a nervous breakdown parenting. Maybe that's a measure of success. That's okay. The little achievements, count your blessings, have a gratitude diary. Really, piece of paper, gratitude diary. You're grateful for 3 things that happened today. That's enough. And apply this finally spiritually. All of this can be true with our relationship with God. Now remember, I'm not undermining some core truths here, that we are called to be holy, to be saints. And Jesus says, so this is arguing against me and Francis de Sales and Voltaire, Jesus says, be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect. So in one sense, yes, we're called to be perfect. But how? How? Through a path of gentle, loving, trusting, growing in love with the grace of God. That's how. So we are called to be perfect, but gently and slowly and one step at a time. We're not called to be perfectly perfect in a perfect way, in perfect timing, but in God's timing, which might not be our timing. So it's not to undermine the call to holiness or the deep desire in the biblical sense to be perfect, but to get rid of the idea that God is like a perfectionist parent, or even worse, an angry slave driver. He wants us to be holy, to grow in love, not to sin, but he's tender, compassionate, understanding, merciful. How liberating to know that God wants to help us to do what we can do and to be forgiving of ourselves as well. He's like a parent who delights in his children and all the little things they can do. To do little things, as St. Therese says, with great love. How liberating it is to see that we're called to do good, to do what we can. Yes, not to sin. And certainly, if we're struggling and trapped in mortal sin, to pray for the grace of God and to turn our back on that. So again, this is not a talk about sin and holiness and going to confession. We are called to holiness. But in the day-to-day things, in the day-to-day spiritual life, to realize that we're called to grow with the grace of God and to take one step at a time, and that to do something good and humble and worthwhile and simple is often such a beautiful gift, and all that God wishes at this time. He wants us to be heroic. We're called to heroic virtue, but heroism in the circumstances of my real life, with the gifts I've been given and with the strengths and weaknesses that I have. We need to shift the goal, in other words, just to bring things to a conclusion. Not always to be seeking perfection, but to seeking the good. To say, maybe my job is not to finish everything, but just to start something. Just to have begun a friendship or a relationship, even I'm not sure where it's going to go. To say that I'm seeking 80%, not necessarily 100%. If I go running, here's an example. When I'm halfway through my running, I say to myself, Stephen, the goal is just to finish. It's not to finish well. Just to get to the finishing line is enough. To go on a crazy diet? No. Simply to say, I'm going to stop eating 3 bars of chocolate in the evening. To pray for 3 hours a day? I can't do that maybe. But just to say, I'm going to pray for 5 minutes in the morning, however badly it goes. As Don John Chapman says, pray as you can, not as you can't. Maybe today, my goal today, I want to be a saint in the long term, but my goal today is not to be a saint because I feel that's beyond me, but it's just to say sorry for my mortal sins and to go to confession and to pray that I can walk with God humbly. So many examples, and I could go on and on. The perfect is the enemy of the good. Look, I'm not going to read this lovely passage out from St. Francis de Sales. I've given you the main quote. If you want to read this, it's in the Treatise on the Love of God, Book 8, Chapter 14. And to sum up again, he says, many people busy or worry themselves trying to discover what is better, but they miss the opportunity of doing that much that is good. Of doing much that is good. Deeds give God far more glory than any amount of time wasted in trying to discriminate between good and better. In other words, according to Francis de Sales, if we spend our whole life worrying about what's perfect rather than what's good, instead of actually getting on with the good thing that we can do that lies before us, we will have wasted so many opportunities to love and so many opportunities to be a saint. All right. Look, you can forget everything I've said, but just memorize that lovely phrase. The perfect is the enemy of the good. I hope it will be helpful for you. It's been really, really helpful for me in many different situations. And I hope it will pop into your mind at a moment when you need encouragement or a nudge to do something that you know is good, even if you're worried about it not being perfect. Nice to be with you. God bless.